Afternoon and welcome to the next in the installment of our Cybersecurity Series for the College of Law. This time around we're talking about patching and Internet of Things. I'd just like to tell everyone that we've been doing this for a few times now, and we've had security assessments and technology policy back in March. We talked about getting a nice datum in by basically looking at what your current security posture is, where you have any quick wins and how that fits in with your actual business technology policy, making sure we were tying it to a good return on investment there. In April, we looked at passwords and multi-factor authentication, making sure that you actually have very good password hygiene, especially these days with the amount of phishing attacks, grabbing passwords for other things or websites and other not well protected assets that are releasing those out. And looking at multi-factor authentication and the WatchGuard authentication app, which I have to admit is something I use many times every day. In May, we looked at protecting data for remote users. It was certainly a very timely thing as everyone had migrated out of offices due to COVID, although if you're in Victoria, you still are. It'll be interesting to see how things go with Victoria and the rest of Australia with that. But I think Queensland's certainly ahead of the curve there a bit. In June, we moved on to business continuity and backup. Basically the mainstay of if anything goes wrong, the last ditch thing you have is your backups of your data. And making sure that backups aren't just of the data you think you're backing up, like your server, but also those other things that you probably haven't thought of, like any cloud apps that are out there or anything like that. So, things like Office 365 and Gmail definitely don't back up your data, and it's worth investing in a third-party product that does, just so you can get access to that in the event of anything happening. In July, we talked about firewalls and next generation AV, moving on from what people had, which was firewalls and I guess last generation AV. With the advent of firewalls with a number of onboard services and layered approach to security, and next generation AV, which is replacing traditional AV with looking at products like EDR and other more advanced technologies. In August, we looked at detecting and tracking events, primarily at using SIEM, S-I-E-M, and providing the information from that into your greater security efforts, as well as a log in case things actually happen, so you can go back and do things like only contact those who actually had data that was lost or interfered with, and not have to worry about those who didn't have any issues at all. And SIEM provided the tools and the depth of transparency in what was going on to do that. We're at September now, and patching and IoT is today's topics. In October, we will move on to dark web scanning and security awareness training, where we'll look at what is the dark web, looking for credentials that have been lost on the dark web. Generally, once they're up for sale there, it's pretty much too late. And then looking at security awareness training, providing our employees and ourselves with the necessary skills to be able to deal with security threats on a day-to-day basis. In November, we move on to email anti-spam and protecting the number one way that we get phished, which represents approximately 2/3 of the loss of passwords and attacks from us. And in December, we finally move on to incident response, i.e. what do we do once things have actually gone wrong and we've been hacked, and insurance, or can we get a bit of money out of this to pay for the loss of business, the cost to actually get recovered, and all those things. So today's agenda: what is IoT or Internet of Things, the benefits of patching, and the ways to protect your organization. So as we always do, why are we here? Well, 61% of organizations have experienced an IoT security incident. The use of Internet of Things devices is getting bigger and bigger, and we're looking to hit 21.5 billion devices in 2025, and medical is the fastest growing industry. Let's let that sink in. Medical devices are the fastest growing Internet of Things, and they are things that have security incidents. So all those web-enabled and Wi-Fi connected pacemakers and things like that are starting to become a security incident waiting. Certainly one that I think has some fairly serious repercussions there. And 60% of network breaches involve vulnerabilities for which a patch was available but not applied. So as the news article says there, critical security flaws found in millions of IoT devices. This is something that keeps popping up with a bit of regularity. whether you've got, a camera or a printer or something like that on your network, it's likely to have some sort of flaw in its security and probably has never been patched since it was bought. So the facts, as it said before, 21.5 billion actively connected IoT devices are predicted to be there by 2025. The global market is estimated to grow by 1.1 trillion. That's just bizarrely huge by 2026. And the first half of 2019 showed more than 100 million attacks on smart devices. That's just things like phones and watches. We're not talking about the rest of the Internet of Things. And in 1999, the Internet of Things term was first invented. So it's been around for a while, and this has been a fairly growing industry. But even looking at Windows, just to date this year, there's been 860 patches released by Microsoft. That's a huge amount, and that's just one operating system in one environment. So how does that fit into the NIST Cyber Security Framework? Well, looking at the framework, we've got the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover areas, and I believe that this fits solely and entirely in the maintenance one under protect. We're looking to maintain our environment and make sure that everything's up to date and everything is patched and looked after. So what is IoT? Well, currently there are 5 types of IoT. You've got military things, the IOMT, which is looking at things like, surveillance devices, human wearable stuff. These days we're talking about, looking at the Australian military and in the field. They've got a lot of comms gear. They've got video cameras. They've got feeds back in. They've got feeds back out. They've got, all their surveillance gear flying around them, seeing what's going on. And that's not even talking about what's in all the vehicles. And this counts as an Internet of Things that plugs into the global Internet as such. We've got, consumer IoT. Scarily enough, looking at our house, we've got a number of light fixtures, Google devices, even looking at all of our AV gear, it's all connected to the internet. So there's, I think, something scary like in our house, 83 items on our network, which I got to think is getting pretty normal for most homes as they start adding bits and pieces here and there. You've got commercial IoT, and this does include the medical stuff like pacemakers, but you've got vehicle monitoring systems as well. The amount of trucks that are on the road in Australia, pretty much all of these have vehicle monitoring. And there's the amount of machines and stuff like that that also have them. So when you think about, an area that could be attacked, it's massive when you look at things like that. And then you've got industrial Internet of Things and infrastructure Internet of Things. And these cover things like your power and your water, those sort of things that are delivered to us that, when you think about being hacked on that sort of level, it's, quite a scary thought, to be honest. So Internet of Things really does cover all those bits and pieces that you don't normally think of as a computer. So something running, Apple OS or Windows, we know what they are, but when you look around, what else is connected to your network? It's massive. Security cameras, lights, switches, the whole lot. But, why should we patch? What is the point of patching? I guess there are 2 things to patch for: security flaws and improving functionality. So when you look at the functionality, we're looking to add features. Microsoft's pretty good with that. They've currently brought out 2004, which is their latest patch to Windows 10, and that adds a number of features to that. But every week on Patch Tuesday, they bring out more and more updates that generally cover a lot of security fixes and bugs and things like that. It's an area for manufacturers to keep making their products better and slowly updating things and making sure that all the bugs are fixed and that they're operating as best they could and adding features as things go along. You've got firmware and you've got software. Firmware is what runs on a hardware device, and software is generally what runs on top of another operating system like Windows. Talking about Tooth, for example, it allowed hackers to take control of an IoT device or stop it from working by exploiting vulnerabilities in third-party code they'd used to make it. And you hear about, can you hack a car? Well, these days it's actually been proven as something you can do. So even looking at IoT and taking control of things like vehicles is a doable thing. So Microsoft and HackerOne both offer bounty programs. This is an area that's becoming quite big business. Microsoft offers a bounty of 15 to 250,000 US dollars, depending on the type of vulnerability and the product that's in. And they pay these for anything that's found by a third-party hacker and identified for them. HackerOne's I guess a group is a kind of a nice term for it. They're more of a sort of business that has a number of ethical hackers that work for them. And they do a number of things, like anything from an event, where they'll run an event where people will have 24 hours to hack a particular product, or they'll do various sort of private programs and competitions and things like that for a number of different software developers. And it just basically gives hackers a way to earn an income legitimately by hacking other people's products to find bugs and flaws, and for those people who supply those products to get this awesome amount of information back to them. And it just makes it so much easier for people to organizations like PayPal and Shopify and Uber and places like that, to make sure that their products are up to scratch and that they don't have any security vulnerabilities. So I'm going to hand over now to the lovely Matt from WatchGuard, who's going to go in a little bit more technical detail about some of the products out there and some of the hacks that have come along, including a really quite notable and funny one that I think everyone's going to enjoy.
Okay, so David sort of mentioned a few things about patching there, and it's how it affects quite a few layers of the IT stack. I was going to start with the fact that people always think about patching in terms of PCs and servers. That's the stuff that you do every day. Thankfully, that's become a lot easier to manage. Sort of Windows takes care of a lot of it for you. But there's so many other layers in your IT stack that you need to be aware of. Things like routers and switches, whether they're small little devices you have in your home network or the big enterprise-grade routers and switches you see. But also things like printers and NAS servers. That's that little black box in the middle at the bottom. Network attached storage. They are quite often targeted a lot lately, simply because they're another device that aren't terribly well looked after. People put them on the network and forget about them. But even things like wireless access points, it's another device. All of these are effectively compute devices that are on your network, and they can certainly be attacked by hackers or even malware. Anytime there's a vulnerability in something, it can be attacked. But now it stretches off into all the things like, phones, and that Ring doorbell is there. They're certainly hackable. Things like baby monitors, very well-known incidents about those being attacked, people hacking into them and monitoring and doing naughty things with them. Also normal, regular, everyday CCTV cameras as well. But one of my favorite devices that people connect to the network these days is your smart TV. How often do you ever patch that? How often do you ever look at it in terms of being a threat to your network? Well, it is, because a lot of TVs like mine have effectively a soft access point that always runs inside the TV, and that's there for screencasting. With my TV, there's very little control around the security of that, and I can't remember ever seeing a patch being released for my TV. So, it's a hackable device. You connect it to your network, it could be a problem. And nowadays, fridges, which I don't get. I don't know why I want internet in my fridge, but apparently some people do. Again, connected to your network, it becomes another attack point. And, one of the reasons behind patching, as David said, is around security or functionality. Now, one thing that non-IT people don't realize is this extends right down into the actual firmware of your computer. So the motherboards and the other peripheral cards on there, a network card or any type of thing like that. All of those are effectively compute devices. They have their own firmware on there, and they do need to be patched or maintained in terms of security or functionality. And with other devices coming in these days, my air conditioning at home is remotely controllable over the internet. If you have that little app, you can talk to it over the internet. I don't actually have mine connected to the internet. I just use it within the house. But the picture on the right there is around building automation systems. So where I used to work in another secure environment, I looked after the building automation security. And that's something that people can attack from anywhere in the world. In fact, Google in Sydney had a problem with their building maintenance actually being online, and somebody found it on the internet. Again, it's another layer of thing that needs to be considered. They're compute devices, people can attack them. Therefore, you need to look at, are they secure or not? Now, one of my favorite stories was this one. There's a fish with a PH and there's a fish with a F. it's a fish or a fish. So phishing with the PH is, attackers sending your email, they send it to your users. They're trying to get people to click on a link and maybe download malware, or to, be taken off to a fake login page where they're going to expose their username and password. Now, Phish with an F is how attackers actually stole the high roller database from a casino in America. Crazy story. And you'll think, well, how? What the heck's got a fish got to do with it? Well, it's because the casino, they look after the casino. They had tropical fish tanks in their foyer, and they don't look after that. They outsource it to some guy who put in thermometers that were effectively IoT. They could be remotely monitored, and connected it to the casino's network via the wireless. Now, hackers just came through and realized, hang on a tick, we can see these devices. And lo and behold, they were on the casino network. So they were able to break in through the thermostats and get into the actual casino network. They took the high roller database. So that's actually something really concerning for that casino. Those are the guys you want to look after. They're worth a lot of money. Imagine someone doing that to your environment simply because you've got some little device in there that might be a convenience factor, but someone else can exploit that. A couple of tips here. First of all, probably, an IoT thermometer was not the best idea in the first place. The other idea would be simply segment the network so that you don't have those sort of devices connected to your main network. And that way, if somebody does break in via an IoT device, they simply can't get back into your actual corporate data. So I'm a big fan of network segmentation. Now that's really far-fetched, but it happened. And a lot of these problems come through things like, there was a disclosure called Ripple 20. There were 19 zero-day vulnerabilities found in the IT stack, or the TCP/IP stack. That's the networking communication stack that's used in a lot of devices across a lot of businesses. And these are typically consumer grade devices, or it could be industrial controls, those sort of things. That particular library for the networking stack was used in so many devices, and all those vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities, means nobody had actually disclosed them before. And that meant that they were exploitable, just like that thermometer. And that's what we call, it created a problem in the supply chain. People writing software using other software creates that issue in the supply chain. Anyway, so my background, I've done a lot of work in large financial networks, those sort of things, and also global networks. And I used to look after a lot of these sort of maintenance for patches and that sort of stuff. In fact, at one stage, I was a change control manager. And in terms of best practices, you do need to audit the operating systems and application software that you have in your environment. Also, you need to know what other devices like printers or IoT devices. You need to assess them in terms of the potential vulnerabilities in your environment. So if everything is connected to your main network, it is a problem. If you can segment your network, that does get rid of some of those issues, but they still remain a problem until you patch them. So you need things like a compliance program, make sure that people are going there regularly reviewing them, making sure that things are getting looked after, they're getting patched, a regular maintenance schedule. So it's just like looking after a car. You need to identify, in our case, we had product owners who were responsible for the maintenance of the products in their environment. We had change control processes to make sure that we're doing this effectively. And we also reviewed and assessed patch releases when they came through. And I'll get to that in a minute. Now, why are we doing this? Well, because patches can actually cause outages. So, IBM in New Zealand, I was actually in Auckland when this happened. They had a data center that went down for 2 days because a patch on a core router screwed up. It failed for some reason, and it took down the entire data center. So they had a big issue in terms of their ability to recover from that effectively. They didn't have enough contingency planning in there to handle that. Things like a lot of AV updates, and this one does mention a particular company, Symantec, but every single AV vendor has done exactly the same thing. They've released a update or something that has caused that blue screen of death. That's where the server simply stops in its tracks and it just displays a blue screen and says, yep, got a problem. Same with Windows. Microsoft released patches that can accidentally blue screen PCs. So patches can be dangerous. You need them to secure yourself, but they can be dangerous. So we used to triage patches in our environment. We used to look and say, well, is this particular patch relevant to our environment? Yes or no. If it's no, we documented that So we knew that we'd looked at the patch and we knew that we could safely ignore it. But you might have to come back later and say, hey, is that patch relevant now? We might have introduced something new that needs that patch. Also, patches can be either critical security patches. So, if it could be exploited, we want to get that in as soon as possible. If it's unlikely to be exploited, yeah, okay, low issue. We'll schedule it along with the next regular maintenance. If it's essential functionality, you might be waiting for this functionality to help your business. Okay, might need to get that in quickly. But if it's not, again, next scheduled maintenance, we'll get to it. It could be regulatory compliance reasons why you need to patch things. In some cases, Microsoft, you phone them up, say, I've got a problem with something. First thing they ask is, have you got the latest version? Have you installed the latest patch? So there can be those sort of issues in there as well. In terms of the change control, as I said, I was a change control manager. The good change control never gets in the way. It's designed to protect you. And that's what we really explain to people. On a financial network, if I take the network down, it could cost millions in reparations or lost business. So we need to cover our butts. We need to make sure that the change controls clearly explains what's going on. There's a scope for the work. There are approvals. So, the poor old guy doing the work is not going to he's not going to be blamed for it. The approvals, it has to be approved by a business manager or the application manager or somebody else who has that level of authority. And there need to be test plans and recovery plans, just in case things go wrong. And we always deployed in test environments first, and that took care of the issue. One day we actually did have a case where the update in the antivirus product blue screened our servers, but it only did that in our test lab. We didn't release it on the production network because we knew what was going to happen. It saved our bacon, I guess. I've also, when I was doing this sort of stuff, in the review phase, I looked at one of these patches and I saw that there was a big warning on there saying if you use this particular software on your server and you apply this patch, it could blue screen the server. It could kill the server. I saw that, looked at the mitigations, the workaround, applied that. Everything was fine. And then I heard from other people looking after servers that they had servers dying everywhere. And my first thought was that that particular patch. And I said, well, did you actually read the patch? Did you understand what it was going to do to your server? Anyway, so obviously you want that approval about deploying to the rest of the network. Patch management doesn't have to be hard. There's lots of software out there these days that can manage that process for you, make it automated. In this case, I'm looking at a particular console we use that actually looks at the network for us, tells us exactly what's going on, number of computers we have enabled with patch management, number of disabled for some reason, no license or installation errors. And we can also look at all the patch criticality in terms of what's waiting in the environment, what needs to be released more quickly. So these sort of tools give you a lot of benefits in terms of managing that, making it a lot easier to do on an everyday task. And in fact, there's a few figures there. 99.96% of active vulnerabilities in corporate endpoints are due to missing patches or missing updates. So it is something to be wary of. 86% due to unpatched third-party applications. So you absolutely need to look at what applications you're running. The reason is because if you do get malware on your network, that's what they're leveraging. They're looking for anything on your network that could be exploited, whether it's the operating system itself or whether it's an application. And in terms of those financial networks, we absolutely maintained audit and compliance control. That's something you get out of the software here. Also central management of the patching. And in this particular case, that software looks after hundreds of different vendor patches, also, thousands of applications, which is great. It just makes life so much easier when you do use these sort of services.
Yeah, you look at Adobe historically, they've had a number of flaws that have been used in some very quite well known and well broadcast issues that have popped out of there. So it's not necessarily the Windows ones, is it? It's often the software that runs on a device that is the introduction to an issue for a network that can bring it down.
Absolutely. And one of the biggies there, if you've got a Java stack on your PC or your server, or if you've got .NET in the Microsoft environment, there are application stacks that everyday user applications rely on being there, but those things have a lot of power and a lot of potential danger for your computer. So definitely you need to look at them, make sure they are being maintained. Again, a bit of patch management here. Basically, we used groups in there to actually, sort of deploy to a test group first. We're able to schedule those patches, able to scan and, do things to make sure that we understood all of the environment. So patching doesn't have to be a pain in the butt, which is how a lot of people consider it. It's a necessary part of life. It's just like maintaining your car and keeping your environment clean.
So as Matt did discuss there, there's a number of ways you can patch. This is something that not necessarily your business may have the tools or, the staff to do, but there are a number of managed service providers such as us who do have the expertise, do have the tools in these areas, and can quite happily deploy them onto your machines to make sure that they are getting patched. We certainly don't patch everything. Windows feature updates have historically had a bit of a reputation, especially in Windows 10, of breaking things when they first come out. And we tend to delay those, but push through the critical ones. As Matt said, it's those critical ones that you're after, whether it be functionality of security. Those are the ones that the focus is on, and everything else can wait a bit generally. I have some tips to add to the ones that Matt's brought up. As he said, identify everything on your network, not just computers and servers. And that's not just your stuff either. The amount of businesses I've been in, as an example, worked with a few people that have lift controllers, and these always seem to run on some very, very old and ancient hardware. I found even a Windows 98 box running as a lift controller, and I'm sure it was fine, but it was also on the web and basically able to be logged into remotely and running a very, very old operating system with a very large amount of known flaws. And it's things like that you probably don't think of. Well, it's someone else's thing, it's their problem, but it's your problem when they eventually get hacked and it comes through to your network. So you've got to make sure that you do know what's running on your entire network, not just the devices that you have, but every single thing that comes up. There are a number of businesses that can scan and identify all the assets on your network. There are a number of tools out there too. There are ones that cost a lot and there are ones that don't cost much at all, but it's certainly worth doing even on a regular basis. I mean, even if you're using something like advanced IP and just running a quick scan to see what pops up and seeing if you can identify it. We've got tools that provide a little bit more in depth and can pull out whether they've got SMB error, issues, or whether TLS is enabled or not, and those sort of things. So there are a variety of vulnerability scanning tools that can actually provide quite a bit of depth to what's on your network and what issues they may be presenting internally. Also probably brings up penetration testing and looking at that from the outside. What are you presenting to the world, and what vulnerabilities are there as well? So knowing what's on your network and what is open and what is vulnerable is certainly worth looking at. Make sure those devices are patched regularly, especially for security fixes. I don't think we can say that often enough in this. It comes down to those flaws that they use to get in, whether it's something in, say, Chrome has a flaw and it's exploited, Adobe's got something when you open up a particular type of PDF and that does things. It's those sort of things that come through, or it's, they've come through your, Phish tank thermometer of all devices, or in case of some of the other biggest hacks in the world, they've come through your HVAC contractors, VPN network, and through their equipment. So, there's a bunch of ways to get in that you wouldn't think. And I've heard a number of ones from, IP cams, security cameras. Hikvision's had a few issues in the past with security vulnerabilities in their gear. So it's something worth either segregating, as Matt said, putting it on its own network so it doesn't talk. I can't see why you wouldn't have your Phish tank thermometer on its own guest Wi-Fi so it can talk to the world and broadcast out what its temperatures are, but it doesn't have access to the corporate part of the network where the data that's actually worth getting to is stored. If they can't be patched, segregate them. If you've got a TV, and as Matt said, who doesn't have a TV that's got smart these days? The amount of boardrooms I've been into which have very flash smart TVs, some with touchscreens, a lot of those, have never been patched and probably never will be patched. They're the sort of device you plug in once and hope that it keeps working without problems. I've actually patched someone else's Samsung TV that had issues with file sharing, but as an example, it's generally not something most people do. And if you can't figure out how to do this yourself, and it's something that is not going to get the time or priority, please engage a professional to help you manage it. This is an area that just needs to happen. As one of the slides Matt brought up, was it 99.96, Matt? That's a huge amount of of vulnerabilities that have been exploited. It just goes to show that it's generally how people get in. They'll find a hole of some description and they will exploit it. And that's just what they do these days. They're looking for a soft patch. They'll scan for a soft patch. They'll use the same tools we do to find them, and they will find them on your own network, and then they'll do what they need to do. Whether that be because you've deployed a Fuji Xerox printer and you haven't changed the 1111 admin password, which is x-admin for anyone out there. If you've never changed that, which I've never seen a Fuji Xerox tech do once they've installed the printer, it's available. It's easy to get on. Those things have a server built in and they have a bit of compute power. So it's not like you can use it for whatever you want, good or nefarious. So these are things out there that just need to be changed and fixed. And historically, they've just kind of been ignored. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Matt?
Oh yeah, there's a couple of big security topics been out lately. I did like the fact you mentioned hacking cameras. I do know a security researcher who specializes in some pretty esoteric things, and he's actually able to demonstrate live hacking of a video stream and effectively making himself invisible on that stream, which is amazing. Wow. He can be standing right there and the camera just doesn't see him. It's something that you'd think only happens in movies, but given the right technology, people can do some incredible things these days. Probably the other big thing to be talking about in security currently is the fact that in New South Wales, I'm sure you must have seen this story, a researcher found out there on the web in an open bucket stored up in Amazon, a whole stack, I think about, was it tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or so of New South Wales driver licenses, photographs of the front and back of them, and also some details around toll notices and those sort of things. Really scary. This sort of stuff is, easily used in identity theft, and it reinforces back to me, the authorities are saying, no, we're not responsible for this. We don't know how it got there. But I always hate going to a club and them scanning my driver's license, because I wonder, well, how secure are your systems? How do I know this is never going to be exposed on the dark web? And I know David mentioned we are going to be talking about the dark web in one of the future sessions, but security, you got to be thinking about what's on your environment. You do have things in there that need to be protected. Everything we've spoken about in terms of patching and good maintenance is all, part of that requirement.
And when you're handing over data to everyone else, this is the same thing about looking at cloud and backup. The expectation that if you're handing it over to a third-party provider that they're going to do the right thing, people need to stop thinking that's going to happen. You need to make sure they are. You need to ask the questions and you need to qualify that, because a lot of the time they may not be. I mean, look at the electronic health record. In the first year that was available, it had 42 breaches it reported, 42 in a year. I mean, that's absurd. And, it was just something that should have been thought through better before it was implemented. Not suggesting the whole idea of an electronic health record is necessarily a bad thing, but having it open to almost everyone and having third-party insurers, accessing that data for whatever they wanted seemed ludicrous to me. Why would I hand over my medical data to anybody? And it certainly wasn't anonymized either. That's the other thing. This was your medical records with your names and everything on it, handing over to any insurer that could have access through any third party. And it was just bizarre. But that's the world we live in. Your data is valuable to somebody somewhere, and you just have to make sure that you are protecting it. It's up to us in the end to make sure that our data is being looked after. And if you're not patching your systems, or at least making sure someone else is doing it properly, that's beholden on you in the end. You're the one who's going to be hurt when something goes wrong. Everyone else is pretty much going to just, shake their head and walk away at that point, which is, I guess, a scary point to be in. But that's what it comes down to. You need to take accountability for what is yours.